In 1975, a Kodak engineer named Steve Sasson built a machine that could see the future. It was the size of a toaster, weighed nearly 4 kilograms, and recorded images with a resolution of just 0.01 megapixels. This clunky prototype was the world's first self-contained digital camera. Kodak had the ultimate first-mover advantage, yet 37 years later, the company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. How did the architects of digital imaging lose the very revolution they started? The prototype was a Frankenstein of technology. It used a Super 8 movie camera lens, a handful of experimental sensors, and an ordinary cassette tape for storage. To capture a single black and white frame, the device had to labor for 23 seconds. And to actually see the photo, the cassette had to be popped into a custom playback wedge connected to a television. It was slow, grainy, and completely revolutionary. When Sasson demonstrated it to his superiors, he wasn't met with a celebration. Instead, he faced a wall of skepticism. The image quality was poor compared to film, but the real problem wasn't the resolution. The problem was that this device didn't require a single drop of Kodak's precious chemicals. It was a camera that didn't need a roll of film. For a company that controlled 90% of the American film market, this wasn't an innovation. It was a threat. To see how this 23-second image eventually cost Kodak billions, watch the full story of the camera that changed everything. To understand Kodak's hesitation, you have to look at the silver halide profit machine. In the mid-20th century, Kodak operated on a razor and blade model. They sold cameras cheaply to put them in everyone's hands, but the real money, the massive 70% profit margins, came from the film, the paper, and the chemical processing. Digital imaging represented a terrifying departure from this ecosystem. If there was no film to buy and no paper to print on, how would Kodak pay its 120,000 employees? Management incentives were tied to short-term film sales, not long-term digital speculation. They weren't just protecting a product, they were protecting a global infrastructure of factories and distribution networks. This internal conflict created a wait-and-see culture. They believed they had time because digital was still inferior to the rich colors of Kodachrome. But technology doesn't wait for incumbents to get comfortable. The question is, could any CEO have walked away from billions in guaranteed film profits to chase a digital ghost? To find out how this profit trap led to a total collapse, watch the rest of the documentary. By the late 1990s, the tide had turned. Kodak finally entered the digital market, but they were playing a desperate game of catch-up. They spent billions on research and development, and for a brief moment, they actually led the US in digital camera sales. However, the hardware business was a race to the bottom with thin margins and heavy competition from electronics giants. Kodak's ultimate survival strategy shifted from products to intellectual property. They owned the foundational patents for digital imaging, which allowed them to collect billions in licensing fees from companies like Samsung and LG. It was a financial lifeline, but it couldn't stop the bleeding. The digital cameras that Kodak helped invent were being swallowed by smartphones, a shift that rendered even their digital hardware obsolete. In January 2012, the company filed for bankruptcy, eventually selling off its massive patent portfolio for a fraction of its once estimated value. The toaster-sized camera had finally finished its work, but the company that built it was no longer there to see the results. Kodak's story isn't just about a missed technology. It is about the difficulty of disrupting your own success. The first digital camera was born in their labs, but it died in their boardroom. Thank you for watching this breakdown of a billion-dollar mistake. If you enjoyed this story of business and technology, subscribe for more. What brand should we cover next?